During the week, we had so many visitors, and they came by car that some days, the whole way from there up to there, one car, one car, one car, one car, one car. You wondered if showgrounds expanded here. So this came through to a lot of day visitors, people who stayed over just for a day, came in, went out. But there were also a lot of overnight guests this week. I don't know. I guess, well, Popolo, you're the third person laying in this bed. Even Mashila Luka, I guess, the third person in the same bed over there. So there was quite some things to do this week. And was a lot going on, a lot of special things. And in all these special things, I don't know how it is for you, but sometimes in all these special, even extraordinary things, something happens to me once in a while. And what happens to me is that when there are extraordinary and special things to do, sometimes I like to focus on these things and I forget the ordinary, the normal things. Or maybe I don't forget them, but I invest my time, my resources in these special things, and then sometimes it's really, really filled. So like this week, we had a lot of overnight guests. We just welcomed our new interns. We prepared a flat for them. Even you're not the first ones. You're sleeping in this dorm this week. We have people from the headquarters. Two people we welcomed, or three people we welcomed here. Even a third person is here, but not here today this morning. We had missionaries from Zambia and other countries. It was really busy. And to prepare for them, to put everything in place, and even when they leave, to prepare everything for the next ones, and to think about this and that. You even heard tomorrow a meeting with the people from the building site and so on. So sometimes this keeps us a bit busy. And I got so caught up in all these special things and all these extraordinary things that I didn't take time for the normal, for the ordinary things. I couldn't make it for Deeper this week. Some of you were here for Deeper and study the Bible together. You didn't find me. I was just rushing to the airport and back, and then we had some visitors and so on. It was hard to find time for the sermon preparation this week. Even my daily routines got spilled all over the place. And in short, while focusing on these special, these extraordinary things, I lost focus on the normal, on the ordinary things. And that made me think, sometimes it's the ordinary things, the simple, the daily faithfulness that we maybe overlook when life gets full of noise and movements. But maybe, and just maybe, that's where God works best. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows of daily obedience. Have you ever felt so caught up with the daily things or with the extraordinary things that you forgot your daily things as well? I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one in this room. Maybe you're in such a special situation right now. We just heard some of the schools are opening tomorrow, other next week. So which means all the boarding kids, they're at home maybe right now. And you want to spend some special time with them, some quality time, because they're now here and then they will come back in Christmas. And yeah. So you want to spend special time with them. That's beautiful. That's precious. That's important. But sometimes these normal things, the daily routines, maybe your quiet time, maybe your time to just chat with your neighbor, all these normal housework things, even cleaning up here and there, maybe these things are sometimes harder to do in these special times. Or maybe you're staying with your uncle and it's your responsibility normally to manage all the household things. Clean up in the morning, even prepare some food, do this and that. But now you went maybe to this special program here at church where you could learn some skills. And you focus so much on this, which is a good thing, that maybe you not always found the time to do what you require to do, which is the normal thing. Maybe you also want to do something meaningful. Maybe you're applying somewhere again and you're rushing up and down through town, finding another job or a job at all. And this is consuming so much time because this special time needs these extra resources that you may be even stuck with the normal things. And these normal things, they don't fit in. And maybe you're even a bit like me. Whenever I get something special to do, I'm very happy with it. You know, these ordinary same day things. If you want to punish me, just give my whole life all these ordinary things. Every day is the same like the other. Hee. So whenever I find something other to do, you will find me jumping in and then, that's also personality. And please don't get me wrong, it's a good thing to invest special efforts, special resources, special times, and special extraordinary things. But as mentioned in the beginning, can it be that the ordinary, the daily, the consistent, the sometimes unseen things, that's not just where our characters are getting formed, that's also where God so often meets us. That's where faithfulness begins. And in our scripture today, we meet a woman who finds herself in an extraordinary situation. But what's surprising is how she gets there. She gets into this extraordinary situation not by chasing attention or by trying to stand out. No, she focuses on the ordinary. She's faithful in her daily life, in her daily work. And through this faithfulness in the ordinary, through being actually extraordinarily ordinary, she finds the extraordinary, or God brings the extraordinary into her life. We are continuing in the book of Ruth. Today we're in chapter 2. And if you have a Bible with you, and I hope you do, I invite you to open with me Ruth chapter 2, the verses 1 to 14. Just a quick reminder. Last week we saw Ruth and her powerful decision to leave her own country and follow Naomi to Bethlehem. We read there, and the pastor even mentioned this in Ruth 1, 16 and 17. Ruth replied, "Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." In my words, where you go, I go. Where you stay, I stay. And your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Ruth chose loyalty, not comfort. Faith, not fear. And now, in Ruth chapter 2, Ruth and Naomi are back in Bethlehem. And they have no husband, no provider. They're vulnerable. So Ruth decides to act. Let's read what she does and what happens out of it. Come and follow me to Ruth chapter 2, the verses 1 to 14. And since I said already a lot of things today, I will let it read by someone else.
Now there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband Elimelech. One day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go out into the harvest fields to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it." Naomi replied, "All right, my daughter, go ahead." So Ruth went out to gather grain behind the harvesters. And as it happened, she found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, the relative of her father-in-law Elimelech. While she was there, Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," the harvesters replied. Then Boaz asked his foreman, "Who is that young woman over there? Who does she belong to?" And the foreman replied, "She is the young woman from Moab who came back with Naomi. She asked me this morning if she could gather grain behind the harvesters. She has been hard at work ever since, except for a few minutes' rest in the shelter." Boaz went over and said to Ruth, "Listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you gather grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. See which part of the field they are harvesting and then follow them. I have warned the young men not to treat you roughly. And when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well." Ruth fell at his feet and thanked him warmly. "What have I done to deserve such kindness?" she asked. "I am only a foreigner." "Yes, I know," Boaz replied. "But I also know about everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. I have heard how you left your father and mother and your own land to live here among complete strangers. May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." "I hope I continue to please you, sir," she replied. "You have comforted me by speaking so kindly to me, even though I am not one of your workers." At mealtime, Boaz called to her, "Come over here and help yourself to some food. You can dip your bread in the sour wine." So she sat with his harvester.
Yes, and Boaz gave her some roasted grain to eat. She ate all she wanted and still had some leftovers. So, what a story! A story of extraordinarily ordinary people. So, let's have a deeper look what happened here. Let's walk through step by step from the beginning. So, what happened in the beginning? There are Naomi and Ruth, and they are widows. They have no husbands, they have no sons, they have no protection, they have no inheritance. In Israel at that time, this meant you are among the most vulnerable. You are among the most poor people. You have no voice in society, no security for the future, no land to farm, no money to spend. Which means if you don't have money and you don't have land to farm, no crop to harvest, no money to buy something, which comes to no food in the end. And Naomi herself had said in last chapter, where we were last week and the other week, "Don't call me Naomi. Instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made life very bitter for me." So Naomi feels empty. She feels forgotten. She feels abandoned. And Ruth? She's a foreigner, an outsider, a Moabite woman, a Moabite in Israel. No right to expect kindness, no guarantee to find food. This is the problem. Two women at the bottom of society, two lives marked by loss, two hearts that could easily give up hope. And yet, in the midst of this darkness, something happened. And what happened was actually not a miracle. It was not an angel showing up. It was not a hero from outside. Not a rich uncle or auntie showing up. Not big money coming from somewhere. None of this. But something happened. Ruth happened. She didn't collapse in despair. She didn't wait for someone else to fix her life. She took up steps of faith. A small step, an ordinary step. So in Ruth 2, verse 2, we were reading, one day Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go out into the harvest field to pick up the stalks of grain left behind by anyone who is kind enough to let me do it. Ruth goes to the fields, not knowing where to begin, not knowing the owners of the field. She just went there and she asked and she started. She didn't know how she would be received. She was not knowing if she would face kindness or danger. And in fact, we know danger was a very real opportunity. Because even Boaz later said by himself, or made it very clear in verse 8 and 9, listen, my daughter, stay right here with us when you get a grain. Don't go to any other fields. Stay right behind the young women working in my field. See which part of the field they are harvesting and follow them. And I have warned the young man not to treat you roughly. And when you are thirsty, help yourself to the water they have drawn from the well. So Boaz wants the young man not to touch her. Why? Because harassments, danger to young women in the fields was very common, obviously. A woman alone, and then a foreigner without protection. She was an easy target. So when Ruth stepped into that field, it was not just an errand, it was courage, it was faith. It was trusting God with her safety, not knowing what the day would bring. And in that very place of risk, God had already prepared someone. And the someone here now, there was a wealthy and influential man in Bethlehem named Boaz, who was a relative of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. Boaz, a man of standing, a man of faith, a man whose heart was shaped by the law of God and the kindness of God. And remember, when we're talking about a man who was shaped by God's law and was following God, this was not, this was not Zambia, which is a Christian nation. This was Israel, yes. But let's have a small look at Ruth 1, verse 1. It was in the days when the judges ruled in Israel. And actually, if you go to your Bible, if you would go to your Bible to Ruth 1:1, and you just read the verse before, it would be Judges 21:25. And there it's written, in those days in Israel, they had no king. And all the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. Which means that there was a man who was really committed to God, who followed God's ways, even when he was an Israelite, even when he was from Bethlehem, even, when his name is Boaz and he's a relative to Elimelech, this doesn't mean anything automatically. These people in this day, they did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. Yes, Boaz was a man of faith. And he was very grateful and very helpful. But that Ruth was running into a man like this, that was not automatically. There was nothing to expect. This was already something special. Boaz, a man of faith, a man who followed God in a time and situation and culture where this was not normal. In a time, in a situation, and in a culture where others didn't follow God. Which means others just did their own thing. Which means, again, if you follow God and His rules, you may not be rewarded by the people. If you would have followed God in this way, most likely people started laughing at you. Most likely this was not something you received something special. They would pressurize you maybe. They wouldn't have any benefit out of it if you were to be a follower of God in these days. You wouldn't have the advantages, just the disadvantages. In this time, we are right now in our story of Ruth. In this time, Boaz, a man of faith, in this time, Boaz, a man who followed God, came up and he acts with love and compassion. And through Boaz, God provided Ruth with protection. He speaks to her dignity. He makes space for her to belong. He shields her from danger. And he, God himself, even ensures she will not go hungry and thirsty through Boaz, because he did all these things. At mealtime, Boaz called to her, "Come over here and help yourself to some food. You can dip your bread into the sour wine." So she sat with the harvesters, and Boaz gave her some roasted grain to eat. She ate all she wanted and still had some leftovers. Through through these very ordinary steps, the steps Ruth took up to stand up, not saying, "Okay, I'm a widow here. I'm a foreigner. Nothing I can do. The people, they have a law to help me, but they are not doing it." She didn't behave like this. She stood up and took up her responsibilities. But even through the steps of Boaz, that he stood up and followed God's way, even in harsh times. Through these ordinary steps of someone, Ruth, who said, "I will take up my responsibility," and Boaz, who said, "Ordinarily, I will follow God's ways." But both of these things came together by God's grace. These ordinary things became extraordinary. Through these ordinary steps of faith, they met God's provision. Even in uncertainty, even in risk, God is at work, quietly, slowly, turning small, ordinary steps into extraordinary outcome. So look at Ruth. She didn't do anything spectacular. She didn't make a grand master plan. She didn't try to be noticed. She simply acted. She simply obeyed. And she went to the field and she worked and she trusted. And God met her there. Not with a miracle from above, not with a dramatic display of an angel, but through her ordinary steps. Through them, faith met God's provision. And God did it through Boaz, a man of faith, a man whose heart reflected God's own kindness. He provided protection. He offered food. He made space for her to belong. And church, that's the way God often works. Not in the spotlight, not in the dramatic moments, but in quiet faithfulness, in the small steps taken with courage, in ordinary obedience. But Boaz was more than a helper. Boaz was more than just a person there. Boaz is also a picture, a shadow, or better, a foreshadow of Jesus Christ, God's ultimate provision and protection. Ruth trusted God to provide, and because of this, she took up steps. She trusted God to protect, And Boaz points us forward to Jesus. Jesus, who also stepped into this world, into this field, into our field, into our danger, into our vulnerability, you know what I mean. Our needs. He brings life. He brings provision. He brings protection. He brings grace. Faithfulness meets providence. Ordinary steps meet extraordinary grace. And maybe right now, today, you feel a little bit like Ruth. Maybe you feel like a Ruth today, alone, unsure, unprotected. And maybe your Bethlehem isn't big as well. Maybe it's your office. Maybe it's your classroom. Maybe it's your home. Maybe it's your plot, your neighborhood, your booth at the market. And yet God calls you there. Not to do something spectacular, not to be noticed, not to be on the spotlight, but to be faithful. Faithful in the ordinary. So, what could this look like today? Maybe doing the ordinary and faithful in small steps would mean to wake up 5 minutes earlier to pray before the noise of the day is starting. Actually, I wrote down this yesterday. This morning, 5:25, my phone rang. Actually, my wife's phone rang. Mine was also ringing, but it was not near to me. And my wife just gave it to me. So it's this other guy who is here. He called. I just called. I have to go to the hospital. So I stood up, opened the gate, locked the dogs, went out. 5:25. It was a bit early this morning. Even it was a bit late yesterday through other things. And then I had a chance to either go to bed, wake up my children who are laying there as well, or very tired, take some time to pray and read the Bible. And actually, this is the daily things I mentioned just earlier that I didn't do it the whole week to stand up early because I was too tired, it was too busy. This morning, God reminded me in this way, woke me up earlier, and I spent some time there. Maybe that's also your part. Maybe it's also prepare the breakfast for your children before they go to school or you have to go out, even when you're tired, even if no one notices it. Maybe it's taking up courage to speak a word of kindness to a neighbor, to a colleague, to a friend, without expecting any thanks. Maybe it's committing to your small routines, washing the dishes, and wondering if everyone will ever see it. Of course, they will see it if you don't do it, obviously. But if you do it, you're not sure if they really realize it, if they thank you. Tidying the house, returning the call, following through the promises, in faith that God sees everything faithful step you take. And these steps are maybe small. And these steps are the very ordinary, normal things you do. They don't make any headline. They don't make any applause, you know. Now, if you're new here today, if a director, we clap for you another time, another time. If you're here for not the first time, no one clapped for you today. But we're still happy to have you here. And these small things in the ordinary, I'm very sure most of the time, these are the small things, the areas where God moves. God meets Ruth in her ordinary obedience, and He meets you there too. Expect it. Expect God to speak to you in your ordinary daily life. Expect Him to provide for you. Expect Him to meet you in the quiet moments. But step into your field today. Do the work you can do. Do the ordinary. Be faithful. Faithfulness and small steps meet God's providence. Ordinary obedience becomes extraordinary grace. And here is the miracle. Sometimes God doesn't just meet you. Sometimes He meets others through you. Maybe you're the Ruth today. Maybe not. Maybe you're also like a Boaz today. Boaz, who was just a man who followed God's ways without knowing what's coming up. He just went to his field and there he saw someone. It was very easy to realize that there's someone else, especially a foreigner. Maybe she looked different. Maybe even the people around you talked already. Ah, you have seen there's one these Moabite. Even if you properly read, and not NLT version what I read, but maybe ESV or whatever. When the harvestman explains to Boaz, he says, "This is the Moabite woman from Moabite." He's even saying, this is the foreigner which comes from a foreign country. Be aware she's different. There's a big emphasis on it. All these people, these are foreign, these are extra, this is, I don't know how she is. But sometimes God calls you to be the Boaz. Sometimes God calls you to be the one who provides, the one who protects, the one who sees someone's faithfulness and amplifies it, to be the one who follows God's ways, and even when no one else does it. To be the one who stands clear on Jesus' way, even when others punish you for it. Sometimes it's time for you and me to be Boaz in our daily, ordinary life. And this could be that we listen to someone who is struggling, a friend of us, maybe, even when your own day is totally full and packed and you actually don't have time for it. Maybe it's sharing your lunch, your resources, your time, so someone else can keep going even when you're already stretched. Sometimes it means offering protection, maybe stepping in when someone is teased, maybe giving space for someone to share their story safely. Maybe it means speaking truth and kindness when others might be overlooked. Maybe it means simply being there, showing up, making space. Sometimes it may mean that you don't corrupt even when all the others are corrupting. Especially when we all get these letters here in Kwamwena these days that we have to go to the council and they are on this fundraising trip, and you know why they send these letters and you know how you get them quiet. Maybe it's time there to trust well. Maybe not to cheat at exams. Some of us preparing for the grade 7, 9, 12, whatever, even other exams. And even if everyone is doing it, maybe this is the thing. Even others get better results through it. And then they can go to better schools maybe and doing this and that. But maybe it's time to stand there strong in God's way, following Jesus' way. And in this way, you can be, or maybe even you will be the hands and feet of God, the hands and feet of Jesus in someone else's field. And maybe you realize it, and maybe not. But you can and you will be the person through whom God provides. And through your faithful steps following Jesus, this can be the steps who change ordinary things into extraordinary things for others. Maybe you're aware of it, maybe not. Of course, not through yourself, not through your own power, but through God Himself. You just do the ordinary, but God does the extraordinary out of your ordinary. And so it becomes extraordinary because He changes the ordinary into extraordinary. Ruth trusted God to provide, but took up her steps. She trusted God to protect, but started working and walking. And Boaz shows us that sometimes God trusts us to do the same for others. Faithfulness meets faithfulness, and ordinary steps meet extraordinary grace. So ask yourself today, where's my field? Where's my ordinary step of faith today? And who is God calling me to be a Boaz today? To do the small steps, to do the faithful work. Trust God. Expect Him to provide. Expect Him to meet you. And be ready. Sometimes you will be Ruth, and sometimes you will be Boaz. But either way, God is at work. Either way, He is at work quietly, faithfully, and extraordinarily. And imagine, just imagine, what could happen if everyone here, you and me, everyone in this church, maybe everyone in this neighborhood in Kwamwena, even in Lusaka or Zambia, started stepping into their own fields faithfully, even in the ordinary. Not in grand, dramatic ways, not in the spotlight, but in the ordinary, in the quiet, in the everyday moments where God often works. If each person of us would choose to be like Ruth, to show up, to work the things we can do, to take our small steps, even when they are not noticed, to God trust in the uncertainty, to act courageously, even when it feels small. And then imagine if each of us also choose to be Boaz, to protect the vulnerable, to speak words that lift, to give space for others to be seen, to be heard, to flourish, to encourage faithfulness, and not just to receive it, but even to give it. Imagine we would do this. What would happen? What would happen to this church? What would happen to this Kwamwena, to this Lusaka, to this Zambia, to this world? What would happen? People would feel seen. People would feel valued. People would feel loved. Ordinary faithfulness would become contagious. The little acts of courage, the quiet obedience, they would multiply. The small step would give a big impact. Faithfulness would ripple outward. So, what would happen in our neighborhood? Neighbors would care for neighbors. Children could see courage modeled daily. Someone in despair would find hope. Someone struggling would find a hand to hold. The ordinary would become extraordinary for them. And what could happen in our city, in our town, in our streets, in our schools, in our workplaces? Small acts of trust and courage, done faithfully, consistently, they could transform a culture. A culture of fear could become a culture of trust. A culture of neglect could become a culture of care. And all of this starts with a small step. One faithful, ordinary step One small act of courage if you're Ruth, or one small step of kindness as Boaz. Just a small step by you, or you, or you, or me. Just a small step. And imagine every street, every classroom, every home touched by faithful small steps, by ordinary people like you and me, doing extraordinary things, not by us, but through Him. But all these small steps taken together, all these ordinary small steps taken together, and they meet God's extraordinary grace. This would change and transform everything around us. So today I want you to imagine what could God do through us together if we all embrace ordinary faithful steps. Is it as a Ruth to just stand up and do what we are called to do, to find own ways and take up a step even when we don't know where it leads through? Or as a Boaz, if we see people to stand up and take this step and show kindness quietly, faithfully, extraordinarily through Him. And then all I said would just be the short term outcome. So I'm stealing from Pastor Mamwe and the others who are standing here the next weeks. So, but if you're familiar with the story of Ruth, you know that out of the two of them, out of this first meeting, something great happened. You know, they married later then and they become children. So these children, this child became the grandfather of David. So the first outcome of these small things is that they found love, they found family, they found home. The midterm thing is God gave them a son. And the long midterm thing is that this son was the grandparent of King David. And imagine we had the time of judges, there were no kings. It was not like, okay, maybe we are in the line of chiefs or whatever. Could be. No, there was nothing like this. But this small thing came to a big thing, to a man who was called later man after God's heart. And even in long term thing, some 100 years later, they were not even just grandparents of David, but grand, and so on parents of Jesus. And these small steps of taking up their responsibility without knowing where it will lead as a Ruth, but taking up a small step. Or even this other small step as a Boaz to say, okay, I see someone who needs help. And in my small thing, I stand up in my ordinary thing and I help others. These small ordinary things, look what grew out of it. A family, a home, a king, and even the Father, the earthly Father for our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And how did it start? It started with a small step to take up the courage in your small field, where she didn't know what will happen, but she stood up and took the first step into a field to someone she didn't know. And the story could have ended very different, but she took her first step by herself. And this was the result. Or the same from Boaz's side. He just saw someone who needs protection, and he had enough to share. And so he did what he did, followed God's way, even when others didn't do it. A small step. And out of these small things, these extraordinary large things happened. And it changed the world forever. That 1,000 years later, we are still talking about the same people. And how did it start? By a small step, this way and that way. I'm not saying all the time this is happening through these small steps, but it can happen. Not because of us, but because of Him. So, what we see, an ordinary step of faithfulness can, by God's grace, show extraordinary results in your life, in our neighborhood, in our city, in our world. Now and in midterm and in long term and forever. So your ordinary steps today, if you start just follow what is your task to do, even if you don't know how you shall do it, and if it's unsecure, but you know it's your task, follow it. Or even if you are the one who follows God and sees someone and God's put it on your heart, do it. Because these small steps, these small ordinary steps today, your small ordinary steps today, can make an extraordinary difference forever. So let's be extraordinarily ordinary. Let's be Ruth's and Boaz's. Let's follow God. Let's be faithful. Let's be extraordinarily ordinary to His honor and grace, and by His honor and grace. Thanks for listening.